Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story.
Story number 1. Mason Dale had been driving long enough to trust the little rituals more than the big plans. He trusted the click of the seatbelt, the tug of the air brake, the way the cabin light briefly warmed the space before fading to that familiar, dim amber. He trusted the hiss of the defroster, the soft rattle of an empty cup in the console, and the comforting weight of a clipboard resting against his thigh like a calm hand. The route tonight was supposed to be easy. A refrigerated load, sealed and steady, heading north with a delivery window that was generous enough to breathe. The kind of run that let a driver's thoughts drift without consequence, carried along by lane reflectors and the gentle sway of a trailer in clean wind. But the fog had other ideas. It arrived in layers, not all at once. First, a thin veil that made the taillights ahead look smudged, like someone had rubbed a thumb across the world. Then a thicker band that swallowed the median and the far shoulder until the highway became a narrow corridor, bordered by nothing but pale uncertainty. The wipers moved in slow arcs, scraping away a mist that didn't quite settle into rain. The windshield kept beating over anyway, as if the glass itself were breathing. Mason adjusted the vents. Warm air blew across his knuckles on the wheel. The dashboard clock glowed with quiet confidence, counting minutes that felt thicker than usual. The radio offered a low murmur, late-night talk dissolving into static, a song that faded into a hollow hiss. He tried the CB, thumb pressing the button out of habit. Breaker, anybody got eyes on this fog up ahead? A pause, then a voice, distant and gravelly, like it had traveled through too many miles of wire. Yeah, it's sitting heavy. Keep it slow, driver. That was all. The line went quiet again, leaving Mason alone with the road's faint roar and the constant, unwavering hum of the reefer unit behind him. The fog thickened near mile marker 142. It was subtle at first, a change in texture. The air looked denser, almost silky, and the beam of his headlights didn't cut through so much as sink into it. Reflectors on the guardrail blinked at him like sleepy eyes. Then a sign materialized on the right shoulder, so abruptly Mason's fingers tightened on the wheel. Way station. 2 miles. All trucks must exit. It looked new, too clean. Its reflective surface threw his headlights back at him in a bright, crisp flash. Mason frowned. He hadn't seen a way station listed on this stretch in months. Not since the old one farther south had been renovated and reopened with a new ramp configuration. He knew the usual places, where the pavement changed, where the rumble strip started early, where the lights made a certain pool in the fog. Still, signs were signs, and getting waved for bypassing a scale was a hassle he didn't need. He eased off the throttle. The truck's engine note softened. The rig settled into a slower rhythm, the trailer following with obedient weight. Another sign appeared, closer now. Way station open. Right lane exit only. The fog pressed tighter, as if it wanted to steer him. The right lane's white line shone like a rope leading into a blank room. Mason signaled and drifted right, tires thumping over the lane divider. The exit ramp rose gently, curving away from the highway. Behind him, the main lanes continued straight into the whiteness, their sound fading quickly, like a conversation shutting behind a door. The ramp's guardrail was damp, its reflectors glowing weakly. And ahead, the way station lights glimmered in the fog. Not bright floodlights like most modern stations. These were smaller, older, a row of sodium lamps that cast a buttery yellow halo. The light didn't pierce the fog. It soaked into it, turning the air into a dense, amber soup. Mason rolled forward at a crawl. The station emerged piece by piece. A squat scale house, a canopy, a set of lanes with painted markings that looked freshly redone, too vivid against the wet pavement. A digital sign above the lane flickered as though it couldn't decide what it wanted to display. Stop. Pull forward. Stop. Pull forward. He followed the instructions, inching ahead until his steer axle rested on the scale. The truck rocked gently as it settled. The world beyond the station was nothing. Fog on all sides. The highway might as well have been a memory. Mason waited for the familiar red to green change, the signal that told him to creep forward until the drives were on, then the trailer axles. Instead, the sign went blank. For a long moment, there was only the low idle of his engine and the soft, constant whisper of fog sliding across the windshield. Then from the scale house window, a light clicked on. It was dim, and it made the interior of the small building look deeper than it should have, like the room went back farther than the walls suggested. A silhouette moved behind the glass. Mason's pulse ticked up, not from fear exactly, but from that subtle unease that came when a routine went off script. He opened his window a few inches. Cold air slipped in, damp and metallic. The smell of wet concrete, faint diesel, and something else, something like old paper. The window in the scale house slid open. A voice came out, calm and flat as if it had been rehearsed. "Evening, driver." Mason nodded, though the attendant wouldn't necessarily see it through the fog and the angle. "Evening, didn't have the station on my route. Y'all knew." A pause. The silhouette didn't shift, but Mason had the uncomfortable impression of being looked at too closely. "Station's open," the voice said. "Need your information." That was normal enough, yet the cadence felt strange, each word placed carefully, like a label on a shelf. Mason reached for his paperwork and held it up. "Want me to bring it in?" "No," the voice sharpened slightly on that single syllable. Then it softened again. "Read it." Mason blinked. "Read it." "Read your name." He swallowed, then complied, feeling foolish for hesitating. "Mason Dale, Unit 7C18, Carrier." He read off the details, one line after another, the sound of his own voice swallowed by fog in the truck's idle. The attendant did not interrupt, did not confirm, only listened. When Mason finished, the silhouette remained still. "Pull forward," the voice said. The sign above the lane flickered back to life. "Pull forward." "Stop." Mason eased the truck ahead. Steer axle off, drives on. He stopped when the sign changed, then moved again when it instructed. The rig crept, settled, each stop punctuated by the quiet squeak of brakes and the soft shudder of weight shifting. All the while, Mason listened for other sounds. No other trucks, no doors opening, no distant chatter, not even the faint whine of a printer from inside the scale house. The station felt like it existed only for him. When the trailer axles were on the scale, the sign went blank again. Mason waited. The fog pressed against the cab windows, beating into tiny droplets that trembled with the engine's vibration. He found himself staring at the scale house door. It was shut. No movement behind the glass now. The interior light had dimmed, as though someone had turned away from it. After what felt like too long, the scale house window slid open again. "Over," the attendant said. Mason exhaled, more relief than he expected. "Over what? Wait." "Over," the voice repeated with the same careful placement. "Pull around." A new instruction appeared on the sign. "Park. Wait." Mason followed the lane to a small parking area beside the scale house. Yellow lines glowed faintly under the sodium lights, shimmering on wet pavement. He parked, set the brakes, and watched the scale house. The fog swirled in slow, deliberate currents, as if stirred by invisible hands. He checked his mirrors. The trailer's side was pale and ghostly in the lights, its rivets catching highlights like tiny stars. The reefer unit continued its steady hum, a comforting mechanical lullaby. Minutes passed. No one came out. Mason tapped the CB again, just to break the silence. Any of y'all ever hit a scale at 142? This station? His voice sounded too loud in the cab. Static, then faintly, a response, different voice this time, quick and uncertain. 142. Ain't no scale at 142, driver. Mason's hand tightened around the mic. I'm sitting at it right now. Static surged, then thinned. Where you at exactly? At, Mason glanced at the foggy lot. There should have been a sign with the station number. There should have been a posted speed limit, a dot placard, something official and specific. But the only sign he could see was a rectangular board near the entrance, half swallowed by fog. Its lettering was worn, as if it had been weathered for years. Way station. No number, no agency, no county. Mason's throat went dry. Just says way station, he said into the CB. The response came after a pause, quieter now. Driver, I don't like that. Mason released the mic. The cab fell back into that dense quiet, the kind that made every small sound feel significant. A soft tick as the engine idled down, the faint creak of the seat beneath him, the whisper of his own breath. The scale house window slid open again. Mason startled, though there was no sudden noise, only the movement. A slip of paper appeared in the opening, held by a pale hand. Not waving, not offering, just there, as if the paper had always been waiting. Mason leaned out and reached for it. The paper was cold and slightly damp, like it had been stored somewhere it shouldn't have been. Thank you, he said automatically. The hand withdrew, the window slid shut. Mason drew the paper into the cab and held it under the dash light. It looked like a weight ticket, except the text was wrong. Not unreadable, just subtly off. The fonts didn't match. The lines were too evenly spaced, like they'd been printed by a machine that had studied weight tickets without fully understanding them. At the top, where the state name should have been, there was only a blank line. Below that, where the station ID usually went, there was a series of digits that didn't feel like a real code, too symmetrical, too neat. And under driver name, the paper read, Mason Dale. Over. He frowned. Under gross weight, there was a number, but when he tried to focus on it, his eyes slid away, like the digits were refusing to be held in his mind. He blinked hard. The number seemed to change in the corner of his vision, wavering like heat haze. Mason's skin prickled. He set the paper on the passenger seat and reached for his phone to cross-check the station location. No service. That wasn't unusual in remote stretches, but even the little SOS icon didn't appear. The phone looked lonely, as if it couldn't remember what a signal was. He stared out at the fog again, and the station lights felt dimmer now, not fading exactly, more like receding. The cab's warmth suddenly seemed fragile. Mason started the truck back into gear, rolling slowly toward the exit lane. He didn't like lingering. He didn't like parking lots with no other vehicles, stations with no signage, attendants who didn't use numbers or names. As the truck moved, the fog shifted, briefly revealing the edge of the property. Beyond the last cone, beyond the painted lines, the ground dropped away into a shallow ditch. And in that ditch, half hidden by wet grass, was an old sign, rusted, bent, and face down as if it had been discarded. Mason caught only a glimpse as he passed. It looked like the kind of sign that would have named the station. But the letters were scratched out, not painted over, scratched like someone had taken time to remove the name by hand. The exit ramp curved back toward the highway. Mason expected to see the on-ramp merge point, the familiar sweep of reflective arrows, the distant red glow of taillights moving north. Instead, the ramp led into fog so thick it looked solid. His headlights hit it and stopped. For a moment, He had the absurd sensation that he was driving into the inside of a cloud, where the world had been put away. The truck rolled forward, steady and patient. Then the fog thinned suddenly, like a curtain pulled aside. And there was the highway. Empty, wet, quiet. Mason merged, his tires hissing on the road. The lines were crisp again. The reflectors blinked. The world returned to its usual shapes, though the fog still lingered in drifting pockets. He looked for the way station exit in his mirror. There was only darkness and fog. No ramp, no lights, no yellow halo. Just the faint suggestion of guardrail, then nothing. Mason drove on, jaw tight, hands steady on the wheel. He told himself it was simple. Fog played tricks. Stations got built. Detours happened. Signs went up. Paperwork was weird sometimes. Yet the weight ticket on the passenger seat felt heavier than paper should. At the next rest area, he pulled in and parked under a lamp that buzzed gently, a normal, comforting sound. The lot had other trucks, sleeping rigs with curtains drawn, idling engines, the distant clack of a door closing. Normal life. Mason took the weight ticket inside with him. In the bathroom's harsh fluorescent light, he held it up again. The ink had faded. Not gradually, just less. The top lines were paling as if the paper had never truly accepted them. He rubbed a thumb across the over under his name. It smeared slightly like charcoal. He frowned harder and brought the paper closer. Under the driver name, there was a faint impression, like a second layer of printing that had been pressed in without ink. Letters almost invisible. Mason tilted the page. The impression caught the light at an angle, and the words became readable, not printed, but embossed by pressure. Not overweight. Over here. His stomach tightened. He looked around the restroom. A man washing his hands glanced up, then away. A dryer roared for a moment. Somewhere outside, a truck honked softly, a casual night signal. Mason returned to his rig quickly, locking the door behind him with a decisive click. He sat in the driver's seat and watched the fog drift at the edges of the rest area lights. It moved like a living thing, slow and curious. His phone still had no service. He unfolded his road atlas, old habit, comforting paper and creases. Mile marker 142 was printed cleanly. No way station icon, no dot symbol. Just highway. Just forest. Just a thin blue line for a river that didn't come near the road. Mason stared until his eyes burned, then finally set the atlas down. He stared at the weight ticket again. The printed ink was almost entirely gone now, leaving only the faint pressure marks. The paper looked blank to anyone who didn't know where to angle it. And in the quiet of the cab, with the rest area's normal sounds muffled by closed windows, Mason realized something that made his skin go cold in a slow, creeping way. The ticket wasn't fading like ink. It was leaving, like it had never been meant to stay in the world for long. He started the truck again, letting the engine's vibration steady him. He drove the remainder of the run with every light on, every mirror checked twice, and the CB turned low. Other voices came and went, weather reports, jokes, a sleepy dispatcher calling for an update. Normal. But when he passed mile marker 142 again on his return trip 2 nights later, the fog returned in a familiar sheet, thick as wool. A sign stood on the shoulder just for a moment, bright, reflective, eager. Way station. 2 miles. All trucks must exit. Mason didn't slow down. His knuckles went white on the wheel. His eyes stayed on the center line, and he held the truck steady through the fog's gentle push. In his mirror, the sign vanished into whiteness. No ramp appeared. No amber lights. Only the highway stretching forward, patient and endless, as if nothing had happened at all. And yet in the quiet space between radio stations, Mason swore he heard a voice. Not through the CB, not through the speakers, but threaded into the fog itself. Even in driver. Stations open. Need your information. Story number 2. The first thing Leela Hart noticed was how the fog didn't sit on the road so much as asterisk float inside it. It wasn't the ordinary kind that made everything look soft and romantic from a distance. This fog had layers, like thin sheets of wool being pulled across the asphalt. It moved with intention, slipping low over the center line and then climbing slowly to press itself against the windshield in a pale, breathing film. Inside the cab, the world was warm and orderly. Amber dash lights, the steady green glow of the GPS, a travel mug sweating faintly in the cup holder, the smell of coffee gone flat and sweet with time, the heater pushing air that felt just a little too dry, as if it had been filtered through old cardboard. The trailer behind her carried paper products, quiet cargo, no slosh, no shifting weight, just a long, patient presence tugging at every incline. The kind of load that made a driver feel like they were pulling a sealed-off hallway through the night. Leela had driven enough winters to know the difference between normal fog and fog that made the mind do strange math. Normal fog narrowed the world. This fog edited it. Reflectors blinked into existence and vanished again. Road signs appeared so late they felt like surprises. Trees at the shoulder became quick, dark suggestions. There, not there, there again, like the scenery couldn't decide how much to reveal. She kept her speed conservative, hands at an easy 10 and 2, eyes moving in a practiced rhythm, far lane, near lane, mirrors, instruments, far lane again. The radio offered a low wash of static with a voice buried inside it, as if someone were talking from the bottom of a shallow lake. Leela turned the knob, coaxing the signal into clarity. A weather update emerged, calm and plain. Visibility reduced in low-lying areas. Use low beams. Increase following distance. It was ordinary, comforting even. A voice that had nothing to do with her, nothing to sell, nothing to demand. Then the signal wavered. For a moment the static rose like wind through reeds, and the voice, still calm, still plain, shifted to something that sounded less like a broadcast and more like a thought spoken aloud. And if you're hauling paper tonight, keep your vents on defrost. You'll get that thin film on the inside of the glass. Leela's fingers tightened slightly around the steering wheel. Paper wasn't an uncommon load, but the wording landed too neatly, too close. She glanced at the display, looking for the station ID. It was blank, just the frequency number glowing like a small, stubborn fact. The voice continued. Northbound drivers approaching Cedar Hollow, be aware of a detour. Old State 9 is open. A sign materialized through the fog at the right shoulder, the reflective letters crisp as if freshly scrubbed. Detour. Old State 9. North. Leela exhaled, the tension easing a notch. Detours were detours, whether stations relayed them. Signs confirmed them, everything lined up. Still, the name * Cedar Hollow didn't ring a bell. Her route notes mentioned construction near an overpass, nothing about a named place. She checked the GPS. The map showed the interstate as a clean line, no detour flag, no warning banner. The fog slid across the windshield again, thick as milk. Another detour sign appeared, this one closer and more insistent. Detour now. Old State 9. Exit right. Leela signaled and moved over. Better to follow posted instructions than argue with them. Better to avoid whatever had turned the interstate into a problem. The exit ramp came up gently, curving away into a tunnel of whiteness. The sound changed immediately. Less open road rush, more intimate tire hiss and the faint, hollow echo that came with narrower pavement and nearby trees. Old State 9 was a 2-lane road, with a center line worn thin by years of weather. It felt older than it should have. Not in a broken-down way, no potholes, no crumbling shoulders, but in the way the darkness sat closer, as if the forest had been leaning inward for decades. Leela kept her speed down and watched for deer eyes at the edge of the beams. The fog drifted between trunks, catching on branches, curling in slow ribbons like smoke that didn't know where to go. The weather broadcast returned, gentler now, as if it had never said anything unusual. Slow down on curves. The next few miles passed with the steady patience of night driving, the rhythmic flash of reflectors, the sway of the trailer on a mild bend, the low, dependable vibration of the engine through the seat. Leela's mind began to settle into that half-awake focus where time unspools without tangling. Then she saw the lantern. It sat at the right shoulder on a short wooden post, sheltered under a small slanted roof like a miniature porch. The glass was fogged, but inside it burned a steady, golden light, real flame, not lead, not electric. The color was warmer than headlights, warmer than streetlights. It looked like something meant for a footpath, not a highway. Beneath it was a painted sign, simple and tidy. Mile 12. Leela frowned. Mile markers didn't look like that, and they didn't use lanterns. She drove on, and a minute later another lantern appeared on the opposite shoulder. Mile 11. Then another. Mile 10. The lanterns came regularly, each one the same. Wood post, small roof, glass box, flame. Each sign hand-painted in careful block letters. The fog did something strange around them. It didn't swallow their glow, it held asterisk it. The light stayed suspended in the mist, forming a soft halo that made each mile marker feel like a room in a hallway. Leela's cab felt suddenly smaller. Not claustrophobic, just emphasized, like she was aware of the glass between her and the night, a warm box moving through a cold, quiet world. She checked her GPS again. The arrow moved, but the map didn't refresh the way it should. The screen looked like it was thinking too hard, the road line stuttering, then snapping straight again. The radio crackled. "Old State 9 is open," the voice repeated, and there was something odd in it now, not excitement, not urgency, but the faint sense of a smile held back. "Stay on Old State 9. Leela turned the radio down until it was only a whisper. The lanterns continued. Mile 9. Mile 8. She expected the numbers to count down to emerge back onto the interstate. That was what detours did. They pinched you off the main flow, guided you around trouble, and returned you to the familiar river of traffic. But the road didn't feel like it was guiding her around asterisk anything. It felt like it was guiding her in. At mile 7, she saw something beyond the lantern's halo, a shape set back among the trees. A building low and long, with a porch light burning. A diner. It appeared the way things did in fog, first as a pale rectangle, then as windows, then as an old sign swinging slightly on a chain. Eluales pie and coffee. 2 trucks were parked in the gravel lot. Both looked ordinary, work-worn, road-dusted. Seeing them was like spotting other swimmers in deep water, a small, immediate relief. Leela's stomach made a quiet, practical suggestion about caffeine and a bathroom break. She signaled and turned in. Gravel popped under her tires. The lot was damp, the air cold enough to make the truck's hood look faintly smoked when the engine idled. She parked beside the other rigs and stepped down from the cab. The fog felt different out here, away from the lane. It wasn't swirling as much. It lay low, thick and heavy, making the diner's porch light glow like a candle inside a paper bag. The air smelled like wet leaves and something sweet, cinnamon, maybe, carried on warm air slipping from the diner's door. Leela walked up the steps. The wood creaked, not ominously, just honestly, like it had lived a long time and didn't bother pretending otherwise. Inside, the diner was cozy in a way that felt almost exaggerated. Yellow light, red vinyl booths with soft cracks from age. A glass cake stand on the counter holding a pie with a shiny caramelized top, a coffee pot steaming gently on a warmer. And quiet. Not empty quiet. There were people 3, maybe 4, seated far apart, each in their own pocket of lamplight. A man at the counter stirring sugar into a mug with slow concentration. A woman in a booth turning a spoon in a bowl as if it were a small clock hand. No one spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was simply asterisk held. A waitress came from the back, wiping her hands on a towel. She wore a pale blue uniform and a name tag that said LULA, though her face looked younger than the diner sign implied. Her hair was pinned neatly. Her expression was kind but careful, like someone trying not to startle a nervous animal. "Coffee?" she asked. Leela nodded, suddenly aware of how loud her boots sounded on the tile. "Yes, please." Lula poured without asking how she took it, the stream dark and steady. The smell rose up bitter, warm, real. Leela wrapped her hands around the mug and let the heat soak into her palms. "Detour," Leela said, gesturing vaguely back toward the fog. "Is the interstate closed?" Lula's eyes flicked toward the windows, where fog pressed like frosted glass. "It gets complicated," Lula said. That was all. Leela waited for more, but Lula only offered a small menu, laminated so many times the edges had turned cloudy. On the menu everything was simple: coffee, pie, soup, sandwiches. The prices were written in clean black marker. No decimals. $2, $4, $6. Leela chose pie. It felt right in a place that called itself Pie and Coffee. Lula nodded once and disappeared into the back, moving as quietly as the others had been sitting. Leela took a sip. It tasted like the kind of diner coffee that didn't pretend to be special. It was hot, strong, faintly smoky. It grounded her. It reminded her of early mornings at truck stops where the world was bright and practical and people complained about the price of diesel. A small bell above the door gave a soft asterisk ting as someone entered. Leela looked up automatically. A man stepped in wearing a dark jacket and a cap pulled low. Fog clung to him, beating on the brim. He paused as if listening to the room, then chose a booth far from everyone else. He did not look at Leela, and yet she had the distinct feeling he knew she was there. The bell did not ring again when the door closed behind him. It simply settled into silence, as if the sound had been absorbed. Leela's eyes drifted to a small wall clock behind the counter. The hands were moving. They were moving smoothly, without ticking. And the second hand, thin and red, was going the wrong direction. A chill moved through her, slow and polite, the kind that didn't demand panic, only attention. Lula returned with a slice of pie on a plate, apple maybe. The crust looked thick and buttery. Steam rose faintly, carrying cinnamon and sugar. She set it down and with it, a folded napkin. "Eat," Lula said softly, "then go." Leela blinked. "Go where?" Lula's smile did not change, but her eyes did. They sharpened, as if the fog outside had crept into them. "Back to the road," she said, "and when you see the lantern that says mile 3, don't keep going." Leela stared at her. A normal person would have asked why. A normal person would have laughed it off. But normal was thinning tonight, stretched like taffy by fog and silence and the radio's too specific voice. "What happens at mile 3? Leela asked. Lula's gaze flicked toward the other diners. The man with sugar stirred once more and stopped, spoon held still in the cup. The woman in the booth paused her slow circling motion. No one looked up. "People keep going," Lula said, "and then they come back looking tired." "Come back here." Lula nodded once small. "And then," Leela pressed. Lula exhaled through her nose, almost a sigh, almost a laugh that never quite arrived. "Then they order coffee," she said, "like they always do." Leela looked down at her pie. The glossy filling shimmered under the warm light. It smelled like comfort. She took a bite. It was good, sweet and spiced, crust flaky enough to fall in soft shards that melted on her tongue. The warmth of it spread through her, calming and strange at the same time, like remembering a safe place you can't quite picture. She ate quickly but not hurriedly. The diner's quiet seemed to encourage slow movements, careful decisions. When she finished, she slid a few bills onto the table. Lula didn't pick them up. Instead, she placed something beside them, a matchbook. Plain cardboard, no logo, no phone number, just a simple illustration of a lantern hand-drawn in black ink. On the inside flap, a message had been written in neat pen strokes. "Turn around before the lights turn to you." Leela's throat tightened. "What is this place?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Lula met her gaze, and for a moment her expression softened into something like sympathy. "Warm," Lula said. "It's warm here." That didn't answer anything, and somehow it answered plenty. Leela stood, tucked the matchbook into her jacket pocket, and walked out. The fog welcomed her back like a hush. Her truck sat patiently in the lot, a solid shape with reflective strips that caught the diner's porch light. The other trucks were still there. Their windows were dark, no interior lights, no movement. Leela climbed into her cab, started the engine, and eased back onto Old State 9. Mile 6. Mile 5. The lanterns seemed closer now, their halos larger in the fog, as if the air had thickened in. The minutes she'd been inside, each flame burned steadily, unaffected by wind. Mile 4. Her hand stayed steady, but her mind kept circling the same thought. Why count down like this? The radio, even turned low, brought back the weather voice like a persistent dream. Visibility reduced. Old State 9 is open. Mile 3. The lantern at Mile 3 was different. The flame was brighter, almost white at its center. The halo it cast into the fog was wider, and within that halo, Leela could see a second light ahead, another lantern and another beyond it, forming a faint line into the trees. It looked like a path. Not a road path, a asterisk follow me asterisk path. The pavement continued forward, but the lantern light made it feel less like a public road and more like an invitation. Leela remembered Lula's eyes, the backwards moving clock, the matchbook message. Her blinker clicked softly in the cab. She signaled left, not because there was a turn lane, but because the motion itself felt like an anchor, a ritual of control. Then she slowed and began a careful U-turn at a widened shoulder, tires crunching over gravel at the edge of the asphalt. For a moment the trailer followed with reluctant weight, bending the rig into a gentle arc. Leela breathed out slowly, hands guiding the wheel with deliberate calm. When the truck straightened, she was facing back the way she'd come. The lantern at Mile 3 was now behind her. In the mirror, its halo looked like an eye half-lidded with fog. She drove. Mile 4. Mile 5. Mile 6. The numbers climbed now, and the simple fact of that, counting the correct direction, made her shoulders loosen by degrees she hadn't realized were tense. Then something changed. At Mile 7, she glanced toward where the diner should have been. There was no gravel lot. No porch light. No swinging sign. Only trees and fog, and the suggestion of a pull-off that might have been an old driveway long ago, now swallowed by wet grass. Leela's mouth went dry. She kept driving. Mile 8. Mile 9. Mile 10. The lanterns continued for a while, then stopped as abruptly as if someone had decided the performance was over. The fog thinned in patches. The road widened slightly, and a familiar green highway sign emerged ahead, blessedly modern and official. Interstate entrance 1 mile. Leela followed it and merged back onto the interstate with a cautious, grateful precision. The moment her tires hit the main highway, The world's sound changed again. Open road rush, distant airflow, the faint vibration of other vehicles somewhere beyond the fog. Her GPS refreshed with a blink, snapping to the correct route as if it had never hesitated. Her phone chirped once, a delayed notification finally finding its way through. She stared at the dashboard for a long moment, letting the normalcy settle like a blanket. And yet in her jacket pocket, the matchbook sat with undeniable weight. At the next well-lit truck stop, she parked among other idling rigs and went inside. Bright fluorescence, the smell of fryer oil, the hum of vending machines. A clerk greeted her without ceremony. Leela bought a bottle of water she didn't need, just to have a receipt with a time stamp. She stood under the lights and looked at it, feeling foolish and soothed at the same time. Then she pulled out the matchbook. Under the truck stop's harsh lighting, the lantern drawing looked even simpler, almost childish. She opened it and reread the message. "Turn around before the lights turn to you." She touched the cardboard with her thumb. It felt slightly damp, as if it had absorbed fog and kept it. On impulse, she opened the matchbook further, checking the matches inside. There were no matches. Just a strip of paper folded tight, tucked where the matches should have been. She unfolded it carefully. On it, written in the same neat handwriting, were 4 words. "Thank you for LISTNING." No signature. No explanation. Leela stood there for a long time, hearing the ordinary noises of the truck stop like a chorus meant to bring her back to herself. She folded the paper and tucked it behind her sun's visor. Back in her cab, she started the engine and pulled out, rejoining the interstate. The fog was thinner now, drifting in pale shreds over the fields. The radio came on automatically, still set to the same frequency. Static, then the weather voice returned, smooth and calm. "Northbound drivers, conditions improving." Leela reached for the knob to change stations. Before her fingers touched it, the voice added softly, as if speaking to someone in the passenger seat. "Good choice." Her hand froze. The radio fell back into ordinary weather talk as if nothing had happened, as if the remark had been a trick of fatigue. But the chill that moved through Leela wasn't panic. It was the quiet realization that some roads remembered the people who traveled them. And that in certain fog, certain lights didn't just guide drivers through the night. They watched to see who would follow. Story number 3. Javier Ruiz always liked the empty runs best. There was a quiet dignity to hauling nothing but air. The trailer felt lighter, more responsive, like a patient animal that had been unburdened. The engine didn't strain as much on hills. The brakes didn't sigh as deeply at off-ramps. Even the cab seemed to breathe easier, free of that subtle pressure that came from carrying something that had asterisked to arrive. Tonight's return route cut across a stretch drivers sometimes called the Pale Divide. 2 lanes each way, long grades, wide shoulders, and whether that changed its mind without warning. It wasn't the most remote road in the world, but it had a particular kind of emptiness that made the mind wander too far ahead of the headlights. Fog had moved in before midnight, not thick at first, just a soft haze that made distant lights bloom. Then, as Javier climbed into higher elevation, it tightened into something heavier, something that pressed closer to the pavement as if the road were giving off a cold breath. Inside the cab, everything was familiar. The dash cast a muted green glow over his hands. The heater worked hard, keeping the windshield clear, though the corners still gathered faint milkiness. The smell of warm plastic, coffee, and road dust clung to the air. His jacket lay folded on the passenger seat like a quiet companion. On the radio, an old song played low, soft guitar and a singer who sounded half asleep. Javier didn't mind. It was enough to keep the silence from turning into its own presence. Then through the fog he saw taillights. 2 red dots far ahead, steady and calm, floating like embers in pale smoke. He felt an immediate, irrational comfort. Another truck meant another person, another set of eyes reading the road, another vehicle cutting a path through the whiteness. Javier adjusted his speed to gradually close the distance, careful not to crowd. In fog, you didn't chase. The taillights didn't grow larger. That was the first odd thing. Javier gained ground. He could feel it in the steady math of his speed and the minutes passing, but the red dots remained stubbornly far, not receding, not approaching, simply there. He blinked and leaned forward slightly, as if posture could change what he saw. The fog thickened in an uneven sheet and thinned again, and for a moment the taillights brightened with clarity. They weren't car taillights. They sat higher, wider, truck lights. Javier's shoulders eased. He set his cruise a few miles under the limit and let the engine hold its patient note. If he had a guide up ahead, he'd take it. Mile markers appeared like pale teeth along the shoulder, white posts with black numbers, softened by fog. The reflectors on the guardrail blinked in a sleepy rhythm. Everything felt slow and careful, the way fog demanded. Still, those taillights didn't change their distance. 5 minutes passed, 10. Javier's mind tried to offer explanations. Maybe the other truck was matching his speed perfectly. Maybe it was farther than it looked. Maybe the fog was warping the perception of distance the way it sometimes did near hills. Then the road crested gently, and for a moment the fog thinned enough to show the faint outline of the lane ahead. There was no truck. The taillights remained, two bright red points hanging in the fog, but beneath them there was no shape, no trailer silhouette, no faint silver of reflective tape, just empty road and somehow lights that belonged to something that wasn't there. Javier's hands tightened on the wheel without meaning to. The cab seemed to go quieter, as if listening. He told himself not to do anything sudden. The road was still the road. The lines were still painted. The tires still had their steady grip. Fog could play tricks, everyone knew that. But the light stayed in front of him like a promise. He tried the CB, more out of habit than expectation, turning the squelch until the static softened. Any northbound out here on the divide? His voice sounded too loud in the small cab. Got you in the fog ahead. Static answered, soft and endless. Then a single click, like someone tapping a mic button without speaking. Javier waited. Another click. He swallowed and adjusted his grip, thumb resting lightly over his own mic button. The empty run suddenly didn't feel empty. It felt like the road had room for something else. The red taillights drifted slightly to the right, as if changing lanes. Javier watched carefully. The right lane line appeared and vanished beneath the fog. His headlights caught the faint shine of wet pavement. There was no visible vehicle, only that small, deliberate movement of light. He felt a tug in his mind, a gentle suggestion, follow. Then the highway sign appeared ahead, emerging in pieces. First the reflective edge, then the words. Rest area. 1 mile. Javier hadn't planned a stop. He wasn't tired enough to justify it and his schedule was loose. But his eyes had that dry, fog-watching ache. A short break wouldn't hurt. A stretch, some water, a minute under bright lights. The tail lights ahead flickered once, like a blink, and slid toward the exit lane. Javier hesitated. It was foolish to let a pair of lights make decisions for him. Still, the rest area was real. The sign was real, and he could use the reset. He signaled right, the click-click-click steady and comforting, and eased onto the exit ramp. The sound of the tires changed on the ramp's surface, a slightly rougher hiss. The fog thickened immediately, as if the exit led into a pocket of heavier air. The highway's open rush fell away behind him, replaced by a quieter, narrower world. The rest area lights were visible ahead, dimmer than he expected, small lamps spaced far apart. Their glow didn't cut the fog. It made soft, pale bubbles within it, like lanterns hung in a white room. Javier rolled into the lot at a crawl. There were trucks parked there, a line of them angled neatly along the far edge. Their shapes were large and still, their reflective strips catching the lamps in clean, bright flashes. It looked orderly, almost staged, like a brochure photo of a safe place to stop. No engines idled, no doors opened, no footsteps, no voices. The quiet was so complete, it didn't feel natural. Javier parked beneath a lamp and set the brakes. The air compressor sighed, and the sudden stillness made his own truck feel like the only living thing in the lot. He sat for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, and listened. Nothing. Not even the faint rumble of traffic from the highway, which should have been close. The fog seemed to swallow sound as thoroughly as it swallowed distance. He reached for his water bottle and took a sip, the plastic crinkling loudly in the cab. He expected that sound to feel normal. Instead, it felt like a disruption, like speaking in a library that had been empty for years. Javier looked toward the other trucks again. Their cabs were dark, curtains drawn, no glow of TVs, no phone screens, no cigarette ember, just silhouettes perfectly still. And then he saw it, one pair of red taillights at the far end of the lot, hovering at about trailer height. The same red dots. They weren't attached to any particular truck. They floated in the fog between two parked rigs, steady as a beacon. Javier's mouth went dry. His body stayed calm in that practiced driver's way. No panic, no flailing, just a slow internal tightening like a belt being pulled one notch too far. He forced himself to do something normal. He grabbed his jacket, slid it on, and stepped down from the cab. The air outside was cold and damp, smelling of wet asphalt and pine. The fog clung to his eyelashes. His boots made small, sharp sounds on the pavement. Tap, 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 each one swallowed quickly, as if the lot didn't want to keep it. He walked toward the building that should have been there. Restrooms, vending machines, maybe a little information board with maps and warnings about wildlife. Through the fog, the building appeared slowly. A low rectangle, a door with a metal push bar, a window smeared with moisture. A small sign by the entrance read, "Welcome." No state logo, no rest area name, just that single word, friendly and vague. Javier pushed the door open. Inside, the light was bright but strangely flat, as if the fluorescents were tired. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm dust. Two vending machines hummed against the wall, their glass fronts fogged on the inside. A row of plastic chairs sat empty, all facing the same direction, toward a blank wall where a TV might have been. The vending machines were stocked with the usual things, chips, candy bars, bottled drinks, but the labels looked slightly wrong. Fonts too uniform, colors too muted, as if someone had recreated a vending machine from memory without fully understanding how loud and glossy they usually were. The restroom doors stood open, clean tile, no mirrors, just smooth, matte panels where mirrors should have been. Javier paused, suddenly aware of how much he relied on reflections, not for vanity but for reassurance. A mirror told you the world behaved normally. You existed, you looked tired, you had a face. The light bounced the way it was supposed to. Here, the light seemed to get absorbed. He stepped closer to the vending machines. The hum deepened slightly, not louder, but more noticeable, like it had always been tuned to the exact frequency of a thinking mind. On the change return slot of the soda machine, someone had taped a small piece of paper. The handwriting was neat and careful, pressed firmly as if the writer wanted the words to stay put. "Don't follow red lights in fog." Javier stared at it until his eyes prickled. The paper looked fresh. The tape edges hadn't even curled. His heartbeat remained steady, but each beat felt more pronounced, as if his chest had become a drum in a quiet room. He turned, slowly scanning the rest area building again. Still empty. The vending machine hummed. Outside, somewhere in the foggy lot, a soft metallic sound rang once, like a truck door closing gently. Not slammed, not forceful, just closed. Javier moved back toward the entrance, each step deliberate. He pushed the door open and stepped into the fog again. The lot was unchanged, except for one thing. The trucks in the line, those still, dark silhouettes, now had their clearance lights on. Small amber dots along their roofs, glowing faintly like sleepy eyes. They hadn't been on before, he was sure of it. The lot had been darker, emptier. A low feeling settled in Javier's stomach, not sharp fear, but the steady unease of realizing the environment was making choices without him. He hurried back to his truck without running, because running made people trip, and tripping on a quiet, foggy lot felt like the beginning of a bad story. He climbed into the cab and shut the door, the seal thumping closed with satisfying solidity. He locked it immediately, the small click too loud. He looked in his mirrors. The red taillights were closer now, hovering near the rear of his trailer like a patient follower. Still not attached to any visible vehicle, just two red dots in the fog, at exactly the height they would be if a truck were tucked too close behind him. Javier started the engine. The diesel came alive with a familiar vibration, and the cab's instruments glowed brighter. The sound should have been comforting. It was, partially, like a friend arriving, but it also felt like lighting a match in a room where someone had been waiting in the dark. He released the brakes and rolled forward. As he moved, the red lights behind him moved too, maintaining the same distance, perfectly, effortlessly. Javier took the shortest path toward the lot exit, tires whispering over damp pavement. The fog seemed thicker at the edges of the lamps, as if light and mist were negotiating over territory. At the exit, he stopped and looked both ways, though there was nothing to see but fog and the faint suggestion of road. He turned onto the ramp leading back to the highway. The moment he left the lot, the sound of the world returned, distant traffic hiss, wind in the trees, the subtle roar of tires on open road. It was like the atmosphere had been holding its breath and finally let it out. The red lights were still in his mirror. Javier merged onto the highway and brought the rig up to a steady speed. He kept his eyes moving, scanning for any physical vehicle that might explain what he was seeing. But the road behind him was a gray-white corridor with no shape, no headlights, no reflective tape. Just the two red dots. He tried the CB again, voice controlled. Any drivers near the divide rest area? I'm northbound, seeing something weird in the fog. Static, then a voice, faint, rough with distance. Which rest area? Javier glanced at the next mile marker, sliding out of the fog. Mile 58, he said, just past it. A pause. That's not a rest area, the voice said, slower now. Not at 58. Javier's throat tightened. There's a lot building, vending machines. Another pause, longer. Driver, the voice said, you need to stay on the main line. Don't take any more exits till you hit the valley lights. Javier stared forward into the fog. Valley lights. You'll see 'em, the voice said. Whole horizon, like a bowl of stars, don't stop till then. The CB clicked off. The static returned, less like noise now and more like a thin curtain. Javier drove. The fog remained thick, but the road began to slope gently downward. The grade wasn't steep. It was a slow easing, like the highway was relaxing its shoulders. The air grew slightly warmer. The mist thinned in places, revealing more of the lane ahead. And then far off, almost unbelievably distant, he saw them. Lights. Not truck lights, not a single gas station sign. A wide spread of warm yellow points across the horizon, as if a city had been poured into a low valley and left to glow. The sight made something inside Javier unclench. He kept driving toward them, holding steady, refusing every small impulse to check the mirror too often. Still, he did check. He couldn't help it. The red lights remained behind him, unwavering. The valley lights grew larger, clearer. The fog began to fray and lift. The road's edges sharpened. Trees stepped back and the world opened. As the last thick patch of fog slid away from his mirrors, Javier finally saw what was behind him. Nothing. No truck, no car, no lights. The red dots were gone, as if they had never existed. Javier's breath left him in a slow release. His hands, still steady, suddenly felt sore, as if he'd been gripping the wheel too hard for too long. He rolled into the first well-lit service area near the valley and parked among real, noisy life. Idling engines, fluorescent glare, the occasional laughter of someone who'd been awake too long and found it funny. Under those lights, his truck looked ordinary, dust on the hood, bugs on the grill, a few streaks of road grime along the doors. He walked inside and bought coffee he didn't want, just to stand near other people for a moment and let his nervous system remember what normal sounded like. When he returned to his cab, he found something tucked under his wiper blade. A small piece of paper, folded neatly into a square. His stomach sank with recognition before he even touched it. He unfolded it under the dome light. The handwriting was the same neat, careful style as the note on the vending machine. You follow. Beneath that, smaller. Thank you for not making it worse. Javier stared at the paper until the letters blurred slightly. Outside, the valley air was clearer, the fog reduced to faint ribbons in low spots. Trucks moved through the lot with practical purpose. Doors opened and closed. A dog barked once from somewhere down the row. Javier placed the note in his glove compartment, shut it, and sat quietly with both hands resting on the wheel, listening to his engine tick as it cooled. He never took Old Mile 58 again. But on certain foggy nights, when the divide turned pale and the world narrowed to headlights, Javier would sometimes catch, far ahead, 2 red dots in the mist. Not close enough to chase, not far enough to ignore. Just there, steady as embers, waiting to see who needed guidance, waiting to see who would follow. Story number 4. By the time the coast came into range, the fog had already started behaving like something with moods. It didn't just drift in, it gathered. It pooled in the low places between hills and slid across the roadway in slow, careful sheets, as though it were testing where the world ended. The farther east the highway bent, the more the air took on that briny, metallic scent that belonged to tidal flats and cold stone, even inside the cab. With the vents cycling warm air across the glass, a faint taste of salt seemed to settle at the back of the throat. Elliot Marlowe drove nights when he could help it, not because he enjoyed darkness exactly, but because nights simplified things. Fewer cars, fewer sudden decisions, less noise from the world that wanted to ask questions. Tonight's load was unremarkable, boxed hardware for a coastal distribution center, nothing fragile, nothing urgent, just weight and cardboard and the quiet companionship of a sealed trailer. The dispatch notes were clean. The delivery window was generous. The only complication was the weather. Fog advisory along the Greywater corridor. Greywater was what the locals called the causeway and bridge system that carried the highway over marsh and inlet toward the port towns. Long spans over black water, low guardrails, scattered lamps that made little islands of light. On clear nights, it was beautiful in a lonely way. On fog nights, it became a place where the world felt unfinished. Elliot kept his speed down, hands steady on the wheel. The dash glow painted his knuckles a muted green. The wipers moved now and then, more out of routine than need, sweeping away beads that formed and reformed as if the glass were breathing. The radio was low, a station that played soft rock with long gaps between songs. In those gaps, the cab filled with the steady, comforting noises of a working truck, the hum of tires, the low engine note, the occasional quiet click from somewhere behind the dash as the HVAC shifted. The first sign for Greywater appeared through the fog like a thought coming into focus. GRAYWATER span. 10 miles. Drive with care. Elliot read it twice as it passed, partly to confirm it was real, partly because fog could make anything look like anything else for half a second. He exhaled slowly. 10 miles was enough time to set the mind in the right place. The fog thickened. Not dramatically, not in a way that begged for panic. It simply tightened its boundaries, dimming the shoulder and softening the horizon until the road felt like a narrow tunnel carved through cloud. A vehicle appeared ahead, just one set of taillights at first, then the shape around them. A small pickup with a ladder rack, the kind used by contractors. Its lights were bright in the fog, and Elliot felt a small, automatic relief. Someone else was awake in the same corridor. Someone else reading the same lines. The pickup's right turn signal blinked, once, twice. Then it took an exit. Elliot watched it disappear into the white. The blink of amber swallowed so quickly it felt like a secret. He drove on alone. A mile later, he began seeing the lamps that marked the Greywater approach, tall poles spaced far apart, their lights diffused into soft halos. The halos didn't illuminate so much as announce presence asterisk. Each one was a marker that said, "The road is still here, keep going." Then the sound changed. The steady tire hiss softened, and a hollow undertone crept in, as if the truck were moving through a larger, emptier space. Elliot's headlights caught the first hint of guardrail, wet and dark. Beyond it, nothing. Not visible water, not visible marsh, just fog and the suggestion of depth. He had reached the span. He eased his speed down another notch, not out of fear, but out of respect. Bridges demanded respect in any weather. Fog just made the demand louder. The next sign appeared oddly late. GRAYWATER toll. Keep right. No cash. Elliot frowned. There wasn't supposed to be a toll, not on this route, not on any of the route notes he'd seen in months. He glanced at his GPS. The map showed the road continuing unbroken over the inlet, no toll icon, no plaza, just a clean line across a blank blue patch. Fog could hide a lot, but it couldn't hide a whole toll plaza. And yet ahead, lights began to gather. Not the scattered lamps from before. These were arranged, a row, evenly spaced, low and bright. Their glow stacked in layers in the fog, making a luminous wall. Elliot's shoulders tightened. He slowed, brake lights reflecting faintly off the mist around him. As the truck rolled forward, the toll plaza emerged like an old photograph being developed. Canopies, lanes, overhead signs with arrows, a set of booths with small windows and dim interior lights. Everything looked maintained but not new. The paint lines on the pavement were crisp, yet the structures had a subtle datedness, rounded corners, older signage style, lighting that felt warmer than modern LEDs. Most of the lanes were closed, marked with red X's. One lane to the far right displayed a green arrow. Elliot guided the rig into it. The booth window was shut. A small sign beneath it read, "Easy Pass only. Proceed slowly." He didn't have an Easy Pass assigned to this unit. That was another mismatch in a growing list. He rolled forward at a crawl, expecting a barrier arm to appear. There wasn't one. Instead, a small speaker box mounted to the booth crackled softly, as if clearing its throat. A voice came through, calm, gentle, and too clear for the foggy distance. "Truck 734. Elliot's hands tightened on the wheel. That was not his truck number, not even close. He didn't answer. The cab felt suddenly like a private room that had been addressed by the outside world. The speaker crackled again. "Truck 734, the voice repeated, patient. "Please proceed." Elliot stared ahead. Beyond the toll plaza, the bridge vanished into fog again, the lane lines running forward like pale rails. He could keep going. He could treat this as a misread, a detour, a new installation his notes hadn't caught up with. He could also turn around, but turning a rig around anywhere near a toll plaza in heavy fog was its own nightmare. The speaker remained quiet, as if waiting for compliance rather than conversation. Elliot exhaled and rolled forward. As the truck passed the booth, a small screen mounted at driver window height lit up with soft blue text. "Welcome back, ELLIOT." His breath caught. The name wasn't rare, but it wasn't common either, and the screen displayed it with casual certainty, like a friend greeting him at a door. He kept his eyes forward and drove on, a slow, steady crawl that felt like walking across thin ice without letting the body admit it. Behind him, the toll plaza lights dimmed quickly in the mirrors, fading into fog as if they had never been there. The bridge stretched on. The lane reflectors blinked in a hypnotic rhythm, each one appearing at the edge of the headlights and sliding beneath the truck with a soft, silent inevitability. The guardrail reflectors, small, pale squares, appeared on the right like little windows into nothing. Somewhere in the fog, a foghorn sounded. It was distant, low and mournful, not frightening so much as vast. The note traveled through the damp air and seemed to linger longer than it should, vibrating in the truck's cabin glass. Elliot swallowed and adjusted the vents. Warm air swept over the windshield, but the fog outside remained thick, turning the beams into milky cones. Then over the radio, the station cut out. Not into static, into silence. A pure, complete silence that made Elliot instantly aware of the truck's every sound. The engine's hum, the faint rattle of a keychain, the squeak of a seat spring when he shifted his weight. He turned the volume knob. The radio remained silent. He tried another station, still silent. No hiss, no faint signal, nothing. As if sound from that direction of the world had been unplugged. And then softly, intimately, the radio spoke. Not with music, not with a DJ voice, just a single sentence delivered in a tone that belonged in a quiet kitchen late at night. "Don't roll your window down." Elliot's skin prickled along his forearms. The voice was not threatening. It was almost concerned, like someone offering advice they hoped he'd take. He kept his gaze, fixed on the lane. His hands held the wheel with the controlled steadiness of someone refusing to acknowledge how fast their mind was moving. The radio continued, the same gentle tone. "If you hear knocking," it said, "don't answer it." Elliot's throat tightened. The fog pressed close to the windshield as if eavesdropping. He did not speak. He did not touch the radio again. He simply drove. A minute passed, too. The bridge lamps drifted by overhead, their halos swelling and shrinking. The foghorn sounded again, farther now or maybe closer. It was hard to judge distance in this air. And then Elliot heard something else. A light tapping. At first it could have been anything. A pebble kicked up by a tire, a bit of road grit, the rhythmic tick of a cooling pipe. But it came again and again, with the faintly deliberate spacing of knuckles on glass. Tab, tab. From the passenger side window. Elliot's eyes flicked right without turning his head fully, just a cautious glance. Fog, window, the vague suggestion of the side mirror. No face, no hand, nothing. The tapping came again. Tab, tab, tab. A polite rhythm, almost patient. Elliot's jaw tightened. His right hand hovered near the window control without touching it, like a reflex trying to reach for certainty. The radio voice returned, as if it could see the movement. "Keep both hands on the wheel," it said softly. Elliot forced his hand back to the wheel. His grip tightened until his knuckles looked pale in the dash light. The tapping moved, closer toward the rear of the cab, then back toward the passenger window again. It never grew louder. It never became frantic. It remained perfectly polite. Like a request. Like someone asking to be let in. The fog thickened to the point that the lane lines seemed to float rather than lie on pavement. Alouette held his speed steady, refusing to slow too much and refusing to speed up. In fog, speed could become a kind of prayer, but it could also become a trap. He focused on the reflectors. Each one was a small certainty. Tab, tab. The foghorn sounded again, long and low. And then in the mirror, Alouette saw headlights. Not bright, not aggressive. Just two pale orbs in the fog behind him, far back at first. Another vehicle on the bridge. That should have brought relief. Instead, Alouette felt a slow dread unfurl, quiet and heavy, as if his mind recognized the pattern before it could explain it. The headlights did not grow closer. They stayed at the same distance, matching his speed with perfect precision. He watched them in the mirror, eyes flicking between the lane ahead and the lights behind, trying to catch any detail. The width, the height, the presence of a grille or reflective tape. But fog flattened everything. The headlights looked like they belonged to a car until they didn't. Sometimes they seemed too high, sometimes too wide. Sometimes they blinked, dimming for half a second, as if the vehicle behind him had turned its lights off and on again without reason. The tapping on the passenger window stopped. Alouette realized he missed it instantly, because its absence felt like a shift in attention, like something had stopped trying the side and started watching the back. The radio remained quiet for a long moment. Then the gentle voice returned, lower now, almost like a whisper. "That one is not here for you," it said. "Stay in your lane." Alouette swallowed. His mouth tasted faintly of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He kept driving. The bridge stretched on far longer than he remembered. Groada had always been a long span, but it had a clear rhythm. Approach, main bridge, then the lower causeway over marsh. You felt the transition. You saw the shoreline lights. You smelled the land return. Tonight, there was only fog and lamps and reflectors, and that steady, impossible sameness. Alouette glanced at his GPS again. The screen showed his icon moving, but the road line beneath it seemed to shimmer, as if the map were unsure it could commit to the route. His phone had no signal. He wasn't surprised by that, but it made the cab feel more sealed off from the world. The headlights behind him remained. The distance never changed. And then quietly, the radio began to play a song. A lullaby. Not a familiar one, not one Alouette could name. It was simple, a few soft notes repeated with long pauses between them. The kind of melody a person might hum without realizing they were doing it. It was strangely calming, and Alouette hated that it was calming. He didn't want to be soothed by something he didn't understand. The lullaby continued, and beneath it, so faint it might have been imagination, Alouette heard a second sound. A voice humming along, slightly out of sync. Not from the radio. From the passenger seat. Alouette's gaze snapped right. The seat was empty. The sootbolt hung neatly by the pillar. His folded jacket lay there, exactly as it had earlier, the fabric catching dim dash light. The air vent on that side pushed warm air across the empty cushion. And yet the humming continued, quiet and close, as if someone sat with perfect stillness and chose not to be seen. Alouette kept his eyes on the road and forced his breathing into a slow, even pattern. The mind could do things under stress. Fatigue could turn ordinary noises into meaning. Fog could make the world feel intimate in the wrong ways. Still, the humming matched the lullaby too precisely to ignore. The radio voice returned, now layered beneath the music, as if it were speaking between notes. Almost across, it said. Alouette didn't believe it, because the bridge seemed endless. But then, ahead, the fog began to thin, not completely, but enough that distant points of light appeared like stars. Shoreline lights. Warm, scattered, real. The sight loosened something in Alouette's chest. The lamps overhead became brighter as the air cleared. The guardrail reflectors showed more of the rail itself. The lane lines sharpened, their paint reflecting cleanly. The lullaby on the radio faded into ordinary static. The humming from the passenger side stopped at the same instant, like a hand lifting from a piano key. Alouette checked the mirror. The headlights behind him were gone. No fatting, no gradual fallback, just gone, swallowed by the fog that now lingered behind the bridge like a curtain being drawn closed. The roadway dipped slightly, and Alouette felt the subtle change under his tires, the difference between bridge deck and causeway pavement. The truck's sound returned to normal. The world's acoustics widened. He passed a sign that should have been there all along. End toll. Alouette stared at it as it slid by. He hadn't seen a toll arm. He hadn't paid anything. He hadn't even been sure the plaza was real. Another sign followed, this one familiar. GRAYWATER Marsh. Wildlife Crossing. That sign was real, he knew it. He had passed it on clear nights and fog nights and mornings, when the sun turned the marsh into a flat sheet of gold. He exhaled slowly. The cab warmed him again, in a way that felt earned. A few miles later, he reached the first proper exit on the far side, gas station, bright canopy lights, the ordinary comfort of fluorescent glare. Elliot pulled in, parked under the lights, and sat with the engine idling. He didn't move right away, he simply listened. No tapping, no humming, no gentle radio voice, only the normal chorus of a truck at rest, the engine's steady idle, the faint tick of metal settling, the whisper of air through vents. He turned the radio on. A DJ's voice filled the cab immediately, mid-sentence, cheerful and unaware. And that's why you always keep a spare pair of socks in the rig. Folks, you don't know cold until you've stepped in a puddle at 2 a.m. Elliot stared forward, letting the normality pour over him. Then he noticed something on the dash, just above the instrument cluster, where he never kept anything. A small receipt-sized slip of paper. He picked it up carefully, as though it might vanish if handled too roughly. It was a toll receipt. The print was faint, like it had been warmed and cooled too many times. At the top was a simple header. GRAYWATER Toll Authority. Below that, in clean text, was a line that made his stomach tighten. Thank you, ELLIOT. And beneath it, windows up, hands on the wheel. Do not answer KNOCKING. At the bottom was a toll amount. $0. Elliot held the receipt under the cab light, turning it slightly. The paper was dry, real, not fog damp, not smeared. A quiet thought settled into him, with the slow certainty of something that would not be argued away. The bridge hadn't wanted money. It had wanted behavior. He folded the receipt and tucked it into the logbook sleeve where it wouldn't get lost. Then he stepped out of the cab and walked beneath the gas station lights, breathing the sharp smell of fuel and coffee and clean air. The fog on this side of Greywater was thinner, drifting in lazy streaks across the marsh. It looked harmless here, almost pretty. Elliot looked back the way he'd come. From the far edge of the lot, beyond the last streetlight, the bridge entrance was hidden behind a pale wall of white. No toll plaza visible, no lamps stacked in rows, just fog and darkness and the suggestion of distance. He stood there a moment longer than he needed to, listening. Somewhere far off, a foghorn sounded once, low, patient, almost gentle. And Elliot understood, in the quiet way drivers sometimes understand things without trying to explain them, that Greywater was not a place to challenge. It was a place to cross correctly. Not quickly, not bravely. Just correctly. He climbed back into the cab, shut the door, and drove on toward the distribution center lights, keeping both hands on the wheel even when the road turned familiar again. Because on certain foggy nights, some roads didn't ask for much. They only asked to be respected. Story number 5. The yard lights behind the warehouse burned with a tired steadiness, making small halos in the mist that clung to the asphalt like damp wool. Forklifts had stopped moving an hour ago. The last dock door was shut. Only a single security lamp blinked now, and then as if it couldn't decide whether the night was worth paying attention to. Tessa Morgan's pre-trip routine was as familiar as breathing. Gloved hand along the trailer's latch. A quick check of the seals, the reflective tape, the tires shining wet under her flashlight. She listened for the small, honest sounds that told her what she needed to know. The faint hiss of air settling, the soft creak of suspension, the low, steady hum of the reefer that meant her load would keep its promise. The load was ordinary enough. Boxed bedding, bundled blankets, pillows packed so tight they might as well have been bricks. The paperwork smelled faintly of toner and cardboard. Her coffee tasted like it had been brewed in another lifetime and kept warm out of stubbornness. The route, though, had a reputation. It was a stretch of state highway that cut between timberland and low marsh, then climbed into long, gentle hills where fog liked to gather and stay. Drivers called it Lantern Road, not because there were a lot of streetlights. There weren't. But because in certain weather, the reflectors and intermittent lamps created the illusion of floating points of light, like someone had hung lanterns in the air to guide travelers through. Tessa didn't care much for the nickname. Names made a road feel like it had a personality. She preferred roads that behaved like infrastructure. She rolled out after midnight, the warehouse disappearing behind her in a smear of sodium glow. The interstate carried her for a while, wide lanes, predictable signage, the soft companionship of distant headlights. Then she took the exit that peeled off into darker country. The fog began as a suggestion. A softening at the edges of the beams, a faint halo around every reflective sign. The world still had depth, still offered a horizon if she looked hard enough. Then, mile by mile, the fog tightened around the road until the shoulders vanished into blank white, and the trees became smudged ink strokes. The cab turned into its own small universe. Warm air, instrument lights, the gentle vibration of a working engine, and beyond the glass, a world reduced to whatever her headlights could convince into existence. The radio was no help. Stations faded into static, returned, faded again. Tessa turned it off and let the truck sounds become the soundtrack. Tires whispering on damp pavement, the faint click of a turn signal when she took a curve, the soft rattle of something in the passenger door pocket that she'd forgotten was there. She was alone on the road. At least it seemed that way. The fog made it impossible to see far enough to be sure. Even when the road was empty, it felt occupied by possibility. Every curve could hide a stopped car. Every shadow at the shoulder could be a deer, a fallen branch, a signpost pretending to be something else. Tessa kept her speed modest and her following distance infinite, because there was no one to follow. The first sign that something was unusual came through the CB. She hadn't even realized it was on until the speaker crackled, and a voice slid into the cab with quiet confidence. "Southbound, you got a blanket load." The voice sounded old in a way that wasn't about age so much as era, rounded syllables, careful packing, like someone who'd learned radio etiquette when it meant something. No background noise, no laughter, no modern slang, just a clean transmission that cut through the fog as if the air itself wanted it heard. Tessa glanced at the CB display, then down at her hand resting near the mic. She hadn't keyed up. She hadn't said anything into the night. "Still," she answered out of reflex. "Yeah," she said, "bedding and blankets, who's asking?" A short pause. Then calmly, "Keep your lights low, don't chase the bright ones." Her skin prickled. Advice like that could be ordinary. Fog meant low beams, less glare. But the wording landed strangely, like a sentence that belonged to a different context. Before she could respond, another voice broke in, slightly higher, equally calm. "Convoy's moving. Spacing is 2 chevrons." 2 chevrons. Tessa's eyes narrowed. She watched the lane ahead, searching for tail lights, reflective tape, any sign of a convoy. There was nothing, just fog and the steady pulse of her own headlights. She thumbed the mic. "What convoy?" she asked, keeping her voice even. "I don't see anybody." The CB returned a soft crackle, like distant paper crumpling. Then the first voice again, patient as ever. "You will, don't pass, don't fall behind. If you see lanterns, count them and keep your count." Tessa's grip tightened on the wheel. Counting lanterns sounded like folklore dressed up as instruction, but the tone was so grounded, so practical, that part of her mind wanted to treat it like weather advice. Fog did strange things to people. It made the brain hungry for structure. A curve bent the highway slightly right. The fog grew thicker in the bend, turning the lane reflectors into a dotted line that appeared and vanished beneath her bumper like stitches being pulled through fabric. And then she saw the first light ahead. Not a tail light. A single amber point hovering at about the height of a trailer's corner marker. It wasn't bright. It didn't flare or smear. It simply glowed, steady and warm, like a lantern hung in the fog. A second light appeared to the left of it, same height, same steady glow. Then a faint band of reflective tape emerged below, a thin silver line. A trailer. The shape of it came into view slowly, as if the fog were reluctantly allowing her eyes to have it. The trailer was older, riveted, with reflectors that looked slightly different from modern ones, warmer, less clinical. Clearance lights along the top edge burned like small embers. Tessa felt a cautious relief, a real object, a real vehicle, something with mass and rules. She eased her speed down and let the distance settle, long and safe. Another set of lights appeared beyond the first trailer, even fainter. Then another, a line of rigs strung along the road through fog like beads on a wire. A convoy. On the CB, the second voice returned. "Southbound blanket load. Take position behind the third." Tessa blinked. She counted forward in the fog. First trailer, second, third. Its lights were slightly dimmer, its reflective tape patched in 2 places like old repairs. She adjusted her speed and let her truck drift into that pocket of space, as though there had always been a place waiting for her. It felt unnatural how smoothly it happened. No one swerved. No one braked hard. The convoy held a steady rhythm as if it ran on a single shared breath. Tessa kept her eyes on the third trailer's lights. In fog, tail lights became anchors. You didn't stare at them too hard. You didn't want to hypnotize yourself, but you used them as reference points in a world that wanted to blur. The road rolled gently. Pines stood as darker smudges at the shoulders. The fog carried the faint smell of wet bark and cold soil, and occasionally the sharper tang of diesel, as if the convoy's exhaust had become part of the weather. Then she noticed something else. There were no license plates visible on the trailers ahead, not that she could see anyway. The fog and distance could hide details, but her headlights should have caught a flash of metal now and then. And the convoy was silent in every way that mattered. No tire spray, no visible exhaust plumes, no brake lights flaring on curves. Only steady amber points and faint reflective lines, moving with almost too perfect discipline. Tessa tried to tell herself that experienced drivers could look like that in fog, smooth, conservative, predictable. Maybe this group had run the road together before. Maybe they were company rigs coordinating on a shared channel. Still, something about the lights felt careful asterisk, not cautious, careful like hands placing glass on a shelf. The first voice came back on the CB, softer now. "Lantern roads listening tonight." A shiver moved through Tessa, more mental than physical. She keyed the mic. "Who is this?" A pause, then, "Keep your count." She stared forward again, jaw tight, counting what exactly? Then she saw them. On the right shoulder, spaced irregularly, were small roadside lamps, real lamps, not highway lighting. They sat low on posts, each one casting a small circle of warm light into the fog. The glow didn't travel far, but it was distinct, golden against the gray-white air. Lanterns. They looked wrong for a state highway. Too quaint, too deliberate, like something meant for a walking trail or a garden path. The convoy passed the first lantern, then the second, then the third. Tessa counted under her breath, without realizing she'd started. 1, 2, 3. The lanterns continued, appearing out of the fog just before the convoy reached them, then vanishing behind like they'd been swallowed. On the CB, the second voice spoke again. 2 chevrons, hold. Tessa watched the reflective chevrons on the rear door of the third trailer, 2 bright V-shapes that blinked in her headlights. She held her distance at 2 chevrons worth of space, steady, careful. The road dipped. Fog pooled lower, thickening until the convoy's lights seemed to float higher than they should, as if the trailers were gliding on a cloud. Tessa's stomach tightened, not with fear, but with the odd sensation of losing reference points. A soft glow appeared ahead, brighter than the lanterns. For a moment, it looked like a truck stop sign or an oncoming vehicle's lights reflecting strangely. Then it clarified into something else. A set of tall lamps over a side road, their lights spreading wide in the fog like a stage. A turnout. A broad shoulder with room for trucks to pull off. A place that did not appear on any of Tessa's mental map of this route. The convoy's lead truck signaled, an amber blink that looked oddly old-fashioned, and the entire line began to ease toward the turnout with smooth, synchronized calm. Tessa felt a spike of resistance. Pulling off in heavy fog was sometimes wise, sometimes dangerous. It depended on the place, the visibility, the lighting. This turnout's lighting was bright enough to create glare, bright enough to make the fog itself look like a wall. She watched the lead truck disappear into that light, then the next, then the next. One by one, the rigs slid off the road and into the luminous fog pocket of the turnout. On the CB, the first voice returned. Do not take the turnout. Tessa's heart gave a single heavy beat. She keyed her mic, but they're all. Do not take the turnout, the voice repeated, still gentle but with the immovable certainty of a command. Hold your lane, keep your count. Tessa looked forward. The third trailer, the one she'd been following, did not signal. It stayed on the main road, continuing past the turnout as if it hadn't existed. Tessa stayed behind it. In her mirrors, she saw the turnout light flare and swallow the rest of the convoy, their amber points sinking into brightness and fog until nothing remained. The main highway behind her became empty again, a gray corridor with no taillights, no reflections. Just her and the third trailer. They passed the turnout and the fog changed. It didn't thin, it didn't lift, but it shifted texture, becoming smoother, less turbulent. The headlights no longer seemed to hit a wall. They traveled slightly farther, revealing more of the lane. The lanterns on the shoulder appeared more consistently now, like a line of warm breadcrumbs. Tessa kept counting. 11, 12, 13. She didn't know why it mattered, but the act of counting gave her mind something to hold. The third trailer's lights stayed steady. Its speed remained cautious and unwavering. It took curves with gentle, practiced arcs, never drifting near the shoulder, never hugging the center line too tightly. It drove like a teacher. Tessa found herself matching it without effort, her breathing falling into the same quiet rhythm as the road. The CB crackled softly. The second voice returned, less like a dispatcher now and more like an old friend speaking from the next truck over. Good, it said. You can hear the difference. Tessa frowned. Hear what difference? Between bright and warm, the voice replied. Between calling and guiding. Her gaze flicked to the lanterns. Their light was warm. The turnout's light had been bright, white and wide, swallowing detail. The fog made brightness feel aggressive. Warmth felt precise. The road began to climb. As it did, the fog thinned slightly, not enough to clear, but enough to reveal the faint outline of hills and the suggestion of treetops. The air smelled cleaner up here, less marsh and more pine resin. The lanterns continued, though spaced farther apart now, as if whoever had placed them had grown less worried. Tessa's count reached 20, then 21. At 22, the third trailer's brake lights flared gently for the first time, a soft red bloom in the fog. Tessa's foot eased onto her own brake, matching the slow deceleration. Ahead, the road split. Not a major interchange, just a fork. One branch continued as the main highway, the other a narrower cut through trees. A sign stood at the fork, its reflective letters fog softened. Lane closed ahead. Detour right. The detour arrow pointed to the narrower branch. Tessa's stomach tightened. Detours again. Fog loved detours. They were decisions disguised as instructions. The third trailer did not take the detour. It stayed on the main highway. Tessa hesitated for half a second, long enough for the thought to form. What if the sign is real? What if the lane really is closed? On the CB, the first voice returned. That sign is not yours, it said softly. Stay with the warm lights. Tessa's eyes locked on the third trailer's steady amber markers. She followed it straight, past the detour, past the sign that tried to steer her into the trees. For a moment, as her truck passed the fork, she glimpsed the narrower road through the fog. There were lights down there. Many of them. Bright white points clustered close as if cars or trucks were stacked bumper to bumper. But there was no sound, no engines, no horns, no movement. Just a dense patch of brightness suspended in fog, like a jar of fireflies with the lid sealed tight. Tessa forced her gaze forward and stayed on the main highway. The fork vanished behind her. The road smoothed again and the lanterns returned, warm, patient, spaced like reassurance. Tessa's hands, clenched without her permission, began to loosen, her shoulders lowered by degrees. The third trailer's lights did something subtle then. They drifted slightly left, as if changing lanes, though there was no second lane. The movement was small, but it was deliberate. Tessa watched closely and saw the reason a heartbeat later. A dark shape lay at the right shoulder, just a fallen branch, long and wet, half in the lane. In the fog, it could have been invisible until too late. The third trailer had shifted gently to avoid it without braking, without drama, as if it had known the branch was there before it entered the headlights. Tessa steered around it, her pulse lifting and settling again. The third trailer straightened, recentered, and continued. A guide, a guardian, or something pretending to be one. On the CB, the second voice spoke, almost conversational. Blanket load, it said. You're doing fine. Tessa swallowed. Where are you headed? A pause, then a reply that felt like a shrug, rendered in sound. Across, the voice said, same as you. Tessa's eyes returned to the lanterns. She counted. 30, 31. At 32, the fog began to break. Not dramatically, like a curtain lifting, more like a fabric fraying at the edges. Holes opened in it, revealing patches of clear air and a sky with faint stars. The road ahead gained depth again. Trees regained individual branches rather than being a single dark smear. The lanterns stopped appearing, as if their job was done. The third trailer's reflective tape looked sharper now, more real. And then, just as the world started to return to normal, the third trailer began to fade. Not vanish. Fade. Its lights dimmed as if someone turned a knob slowly down. The reflective tape stopped catching her beams. The shape of the trailer softened into the remaining mist. Tessa's throat tightened. She eased off the throttle instinctively, trying to maintain distance with something that was becoming less visible by the second. On the CB, The first voice returned one last time. "Thank you for keeping your count," it said gently. Tessa keyed the mic, voice quiet. "Who are you?" The answer came after a pause long enough to feel like a look over the shoulder. "Just traffic," the voice said. "The kind that doesn't want company in the wrong places." The CB fell silent. The third trailer's lights dimmed to embers, then to nothing. And the road ahead was empty. Tessa drove on in clearer air, the truck's engine sounding suddenly louder now that the fog wasn't swallowing everything. The highway signs looked modern again, clean fonts, correct exits, the comforting predictability of infrastructure. She reached a well-lit travel plaza an hour later and pulled in among real trucks with real idling engines. She parked, set her brakes, and sat for a moment with both hands resting on the wheel, listening to her own breathing and the normal clatter of the world. Only when she felt steady did she step out. The air was cold but clear, smelling of fuel and coffee and winter grass. People moved in and out of the building under bright lights. A door opened and closed. Someone laughed softly at something on a phone. Normal. Tessa climbed back into the cab with a cup of fresh coffee and a receipt that proved the time still moved forward the way it was supposed to. As she settled in, her eyes caught something on the passenger seat. A small object she didn't remember placing there. It was a reflector, an old-style roadside reflector, the kind mounted on posts decades ago, smooth and slightly convex. Its amber surface held the cab light with a warm glow, not harsh, not bright. On the back, scratched into the plastic in careful letters, were two words. "Keep count." Tessa held it in her palm for a long time, feeling its coolness and its weight, listening to the plaza's ordinary noise outside. She didn't tell herself a story about it, not a neat one. Not one that made everything make sense. She simply tucked the reflector into her glove box like a charm you don't quite believe in, but also don't throw away. And when she pulled back onto the highway, she kept her speed calm, her lights low, and her attention on the warm, honest markers of the road, lines, reflectors, and the steady certainty of the lane beneath her. Because some nights, fog didn't just hide things. It offered choices. And the safest choice was often the quietest one, made without drama, made without chasing brightness, guided only by patience, steady hands, and the small comfort of counting lanterns until the world returned.